Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast. My name is John Shipley. I am your host and beat reporter, and I have been your beat reporter covering the Jacksonville Jaguars for On SI every single day since August 2019, and we are continuing to march forward to another offseason together. As always, you can find our 24/7, 100% free boots on the ground coverage of the Jacksonville Jaguars every single day on social media such as Facebook and Twitter. And you can also find us at www.si.com/NFL/Jaguars. Okay, in today's episode, we are going to continue with our rookie impact power rankings. Number 9, we had 7th round pick Jonah Monheim. I explained why, while I still like the Monheim pick, like him as a player, potential developmental guy, there just doesn't seem like there's much room for him to make a potential impact just because of the sheer, depth and moves that they've made along the offensive line. Almost feels like Patrick McCarry would be their backup center, today. If something happened to Robert Hainsey and then they make some kind of move at guard, they obviously, wanted to build a deep offensive line so that they can, have quite a few guys ready to go. Now we're moving on to number 8. Number 8, I'm going to have to go with 6th round linebacker Jalen McLeod. I really enjoyed McLeod's tape when I went back and watched it. He's a spark plug. He moved all over the place for Auburn's defense. He won as an edge rusher. He won as an off-ball linebacker. He won blitzing from an off-ball alignment. Obviously, doesn't have the ideal, build, arm length, etc. for an edge rusher. I think he's a linebacker for the Jaguars, and I think he's a Sam linebacker. I think that because rookie minicamp practiced with the linebackers, didn't practice with the defensive line, and like defensive ends, defensive tackles weren't, necessarily separated on the roster. It was just defensive line, and he was with the linebackers, not with the defensive line, which makes sense. He's not a defensive end, and it very much looks like that's what they're looking for, in their defense at the edge rusher spot. They're looking for traditional defensive ends. I think he's a guy who, you can play him from a strong side linebacker position, playing him next to defensive ends, if you're going with, that kind of alignment where he's still kind of on the ball and kind of come off the edge a little bit. I think that he gives them versatility. He can make a special teams impact, but I don't really see a path toward him playing a lot of snaps in any given game, at least not in year one, unless injuries happen. I think he'd be a good sub-package guy. I think he'd be a guy that you roll out there from time to time, whether it's in passing downs or whether, Anthony Campanile, wants to design some specific blitz packages, whatever you want to call it. Because when I watched McLeod, just from a usage standpoint, he does remind me a lot of what the Vikings do with Andrew Van Ginkel. And that's not comparing them as players or saying that's what his ceiling is. It's just I can see him be utilized in a similar way. And obviously, Camp learned from Brian Flores, could take some inspiration from him. Maybe try to use McLeod like that, where he's just kind of roaming around, the front 7 line of scrimmage, and, he's attacking from that edge spot from linebacker. He's blitzing. He's doing all kinds of exotic things. I do think he has that skill set. The question is, how does that skill set translate into making, an every down consistent impact? And I think just from the rookie year perspective, I'm not sure it does. Now, maybe as he develops, as he grows out his game, as the Jaguars develop, more for him and their usage of him, certainly that could change. But just as a rookie, I'm not sure there's a lot of scenarios where I see him playing a ton of defensive snaps in any given game without injuries, of course, happening, which I'm not going to project. Now, when injuries do happen, that's another thing. Obviously Jack Kaiser, taken in the 4th round, will get the first crack, I think, at a linebacker job if a starter goes down. You also have Chad Muma. You also have Ventrell Miller. It's in terms of backup linebackers, it's a little crowded. And 2 rookies are joining it, and one of them was a 4th-round pick, one of them was a 6th-round pick. And they play 2 very different roles. They'll be utilized very differently. But it just shows you, Kaiser, is more likely to play just simply based off of draft positioning. Again, like I said, I think McLeod brings very interesting things to the table. I think he can be a really good special teamer. Just his versatility, his intensity, his explosiveness. I think a creative defensive coordinator can have a lot of fun with him. I just wonder how and when he's going to see that many snaps as a rookie. And that's why I have him at number 8. Would I say I think he's the 8th best rookie of the class? No, I wouldn't say that. Like I said, I enjoyed his tape. I think he's a talented player. I arguably think he probably should have went maybe a round higher than he did. But when you're that tweener to an extent, a lot of ways, like a 6th-round Jalen Walker. In a lot of ways, like potentially a new Yasir Abdullah to an extent, where it's just there's a lot of different things that he does really well, but seeing how it comes into one specific package still kind of remains to be seen. So I'm interested by his game. I thought he was a good pick. I think he's a good addition to the roster, to the franchise. One thing that James Gladstone said about him that stood out to me was they really emphasize small school transfer guys who are able to produce after they transfer. He produced at App State and then went to Auburn and produced. Gladstone said guys like Kobe Turner, Braden Fisk, Jared Verse were all the same way. So very interesting point of view, in my opinion. And I think it's at least worthy of weighing. Like, once the competition level jumps up, his play didn't go down at all. Arguably, he played, even better. So that is who I have at number 7. Please, thank you for listening to today's show, but make sure you remember to like, subscribe, review, whatever you got to do to the Jacksonville Jaguars Insider Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all other podcast platforms. And you can also find all of our podcasts, videos, interviews, etc. on YouTube at Sports Videos on SI.